I try to be really conscious about why am I sharing this and what am I wanting from this and what am I wanting to give here. And that can sound kind of contrived. And I don't believe in being emotionally messy in non-consensual spaces.
Welcome to Lonely at the Top, a podcast for high-level leaders carrying the invisible weight of the world on their shoulders. Because you know the higher you rise, the fewer people you can safely talk to. Here we welcome founders, executives, and decision makers who feel the isolation and pressure that comes with power. Lonely at the Top is your sanctuary in the storm, and I'm your host, soul medic and former psychotherapist Rachel Alexandria. Today on the show, we have a dear friend of mine, Mark Silver, the founder of Heart of Business. He's a designated master teacher in his Sufi lineage, and since 2001 has been helping spiritually centered business owners who really need their business to support them financially. He's the author of Heart-Centered Business, Healing from Toxic Business Culture so your small business can thrive. Mark, we've known each other since I've started a business. It's been a long time.
I don't know how long it's been. It's been quite a while. Yes.
Yeah, you'd probably been in business 5 or 10 years before I started mine. And I started mine almost 20 years ago.
Yeah, because this is 2026. I mean, technically, I guess I started in 1999 and then Heart of Business started in 2001. So, yes.
Yeah, you'd been in like 6 years by the time I got to know you. We met because of Leif Hansen, I believe.
Oh, interesting. I didn't remember that.
Yeah, because Leif was picking you up at the train station and I offered to drive. We were all going to a conference from a now defunct organization called Biznick.
Right.
You were a speaker and Leif knew you somehow. And so I got to pick you up at the train station coming from from Portland into Seattle.
Right on. Oh, yeah. I remember that. I'm so happy you remember that. I would not have.
Yeah, I've just known Rachel forever. I think people remember when they meet someone who seems more powerful or impressive or, like you were going to be a speaker. And it's actually, I was going to moderate a panel there, but I was mostly just an attendee. And so you were like,
Don't you know who I am?
Exactly.
That's hilarious.
Oh, I'm picking up one of the speakers,
That's hilarious. Right.
That makes me more inclined to remember. So you run a business that helps other businesses and you run a community. You've been doing this for a long time. I wanted to have you on the podcast because, I've been interviewing a lot of executives and people who are kind of in corporate, but I also want to include people who might have some loneliness at the top that they've had to deal with because of something they started. Does the concept of the show, this experience this people have, that the more power...
It's an interesting question. It's not a strong theme in my life, that loneliness, I think, is endemic in our culture in general. And there's definitely that, like, culture is broken and toxic, and we don't know how to do community, because we've lost that, anyway, that's a whole systemic analysis conversation.
We could get on so many soapboxes
that's a whole
here.
Systemic analysis there. And so there's definitely, my wife Holly and I here, we in central Pennsylvania, we definitely face this sense of like it's hard to gather community around us. I feel like I've been both conscious and fortunate in that for years I had a mastermind group with other business owners, with people that I really cared about, and I'm still friends with some of them to, like regular contact. But we had that for like 15 years, and I have other friends who are in a similar position, and because, as well as my wife Holly, who co-runs the company with me. And with a small company, there's not bureaucratic politics like some of my clients have worked in, and client I was just speaking to earlier, is in larger organizations where I feel like there can be that sense of separation. That it's not so strong. It's not such a strong feeling for me, if that makes sense. I'm kind of dancing around it because it's
Yeah.
like I don't feel like it's a clear yes or no, because I feel like there are themes of isolation that are in the culture. I feel like there's themes of isolation in my own personality. I feel like there are difficulties. It's like I mean, Holly and I were just talking this morning going, "Oh my God, how do we find time to sit down and have a meeting between like we're parenting teens, we have a food forest we're trying to create. There's chronic issues in the family I won't talk about, but there's all this stuff, and it's like, okay, how do you have a business meeting and feel less alone making those choices? And I feel like it's less the weight that I'm imagining someone might feel as as I've heard from folks, it's like, okay, when you're
Mhm.
CEO or an executive, and it's like, okay, there's people that I can't share this information with. Well, I do have that, just trying to have the conversation. So I think like as you're asking me the question, as I'm talking through it, I think there are definitely themes of that, and it's probably flavored a little differently.
Yeah. I have to ask if you are an external processor.
I do process externally. I'm a bit of an extrovert, and I definitely process externally. Yes.
I just wanted to call that out because part of my mission, I think, with this show ongoingly is to normalize some of the psychological things that I think I take for granted and understand about like people's differences. And this is one of them.
Mm.
Like some people, they come to the show and they're like, I have it prepared. I know my answer. Bam, it's this because they prepped ahead of time. And some people come on the show and they're like, let me wander around this question to find my way into the answer. And neither of these is right or wrong, right? But I wanted to call that out. Like I really noticed the external processing. It's good to name that.
It's good to name that. I feel really comfortable doing it, obviously, because here I am. But yeah, it's good to see that. Yeah.
I do that some too. So I totally get it. You and I are both extroverts. I guess I'm just curious in this moment how much that helps with bringing people in and prevents some of the loneliness, just being more of an extrovert, being more of an external processor, if that invites in more connection just naturally.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question. I don't know at a larger level the trueness of that. I know for me, I had to go through a lot of earlier stuff as a younger person. I'm 58 now, and as a younger person, like not wanting to show mistakes, not wanting to show rough edges, like not feeling like that was okay. And I had to like be okay with being messy. And that's something that I've gotten way comfortable with. And I think that that does. I think that it makes one approachable. And I think that it does invite people in. I'm not, like I've been self employed. We have a company, we have a tiny team, but it's still much more on the kind of tiny business side of things rather than organizational. And feel like collaboration is something I'm still learning,
Interesting.
is maybe a good way to put that.
I really thought about having you on the show because I've seen you like I've been in your community before. I was in the Heart of Business Foundations, I believe it was called,
Hmm.
for a year maybe, and a lot of your community is built online, both in your public postings and in the private community. So I've seen a good helping of what that looks like. And I've seen things that made me wonder, or, I guess made me assume that you were having to hold some kind of stance of both closeness and distance, like appropriate distance from your community. For example, I know you've posted a lot about times where you need assistance finding something or you're going through some kind of health thing or whatever. And when you're just sharing, you have to very explicitly say, I'm not looking for advice or please don't give me advice. So, what's that like for you to have so many people connected in with your heart and to also have to navigate keeping them at a different distance than your wife or your close friends, for example?
Yeah. Well, so for me, it's a question of consent, right? It's like we want consent-based culture, consent-based relationships. And I think a big part of having, at least a significant part of having consent-based relationships is, something that I originally learned in nonviolent communication training years and years ago, is just being able to make requests. And like, what is it that I need? I think in my past, I've been much messier about that, about like, oh, here I'm struggling with something. There's this mess. I don't really even know how to articulate the fact that I need something. I'm just like "Broop." and so that invites anyone who encounters that to go into their natural mode of however they meet. Some people give empathy, some people give solutions, some people whatever. Like there's different ways people respond to that. And I think that as I've matured and as I've studied and learned and practiced, I've gotten much better at making requests about what it is that I'm wanting in any particular context. So, if I'm talking to Holly, if I'm talking to one of my close friends, I'm like, here's my mess. This is what I could really use from you in this context. And then, in public or parasocial terms, parasocial relationships, if people are familiar with that term, I just take extra care to try to make accurate requests about what I'm actually needing in that context so that I'm not receiving something that I don't want and that other people aren't feeling the need to respond in a way that's not helpful. So, does that make sense? Am I being clear?
Of course,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's always definitely made sense to me. You're also talking to somebody who's trained in MVC, yeah.
Right. So, for instance, I don't like to pretend that everything's hunky dory. I struggle with a lot of things, right? There's like we all struggle with things,
Yeah.
especially in such a toxic culture, and stage capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, et cetera, heteronormativity, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of ways that we get twisted into and harmed. And so for me to name some way that I'm struggling, I don't have the consent in a lot of these environments. Like they're not my therapist. They're not like that's not the role they agreed to play. That's in the role I asked them to play. And so when I'm sharing, I try to get in those contexts. I try to be really conscious about why am I sharing this? And what am I wanting from this and what am I wanting to give here? And
Mm.
that can sound kind of contrived. And I don't believe in being emotionally messy in non-consensual spaces. So that's kind of how I think
Yeah.
about it.
I
So I
I don't hear contrivance. I hear you're taking your position, your role as a culture leader. If people are following you, that's part of what you are. Like, just like David White or Brene Brown, you're a person who's leading some portion of culture and you're taking that role with responsibility. So it's interesting that you put it that way. If you're going to share authentically and about messiness, you're not violating their unexpressed consent about what to do with that
right.
or how to take that. That's very deep and multi layered. And I see that as highly integrous, but it also sounds like a lot of work.
I don't think so.
Not for you?
Not for me. I think, like any kind of skill like that, when you're new at it, it's like, God, that's, yeah, it is. It's a lot.
Mm,
But at this point, I don't know if mastery is the right word, but I have fluidity with the work. So it feels good. I feel like I'm fortunate, especially as a man, that, I came out as bisexual in 1988 and I spent years in queer community. Um,
yeah.
and I feel like that was such a, I mean, not like I'm not in queer, but I mean explicitly queer community, radical fairy community, just amazing, wonderful men. And
Mm,
so I became much more comfortable with the range of my emotions than I had up to that point, or I might have if I had just been straight or been in a heteronormative kind of space.
mm,
And so that fluidity and the comfort with my emotions, I think, has then led down a path that has included learning conscious communication and learning consent based relationship
mm.
tools and, just kind of understanding like, damn, our culture's messed up in around relationship, among other things. And I think I'd like to do this, Holly and I were like, well, I think we want to do this a little differently. So,
And it's different than a person who doesn't lead any culture or kind of community. It's different than they would do on just Facebook. Like other people, whether or not it's healthy, feel free to just post whatever they feel like and not need to necessarily employ as much concern about how that's going to land with people because maybe they're only talking
mm,
to 50 people who all have their phone number and can just call and be like, "Are you okay?"
right, right.
So, yeah.
Right. And I think that's exactly right. And because I have my circles that are the equivalent of that are
Mm,
not Facebook, I have this text thread that I'm on that I can be, with folks that I'm good friends with that
mhm.
I can be messy with them. Right. and they're like, "Hey, Silver, you all right?"
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's understanding those circles and how we want to show up. And I think that I think, talking about lonely at the top and leadership, I think that this is an important skill that's lacking in the culture. I feel really fortunate that I stumbled upon the need for it and then had the support of people in my life to take that on and had some really good people to learn from and practice with over years.
Before you ever really had an external community that you were shepherding
Yeah.
or leading.
Yeah. And at least the beginnings of it, of course, it's been honed and deepened because of that. But I think it's a missing, it's a piece that everyone in the culture could use because I think that leadership isn't,
But especially spiritual leadership.
well, it's spiritual. So
Spiritual leadership is like popular spiritual leadership.
that's,
I don't describe that, but not
yeah,
just a single minister or pastor or shamanic practitioner or whatever you have with their 20 or 30 people, but people who influence thousands or hundreds of thousands. Like, these are skills that are lacking.
they're lacking. The way that I would state it is it's not even necessarily the number of followers, but it's whether you exist in a lineage that has accountability.
Mm.
Like as a teacher, I feel like there's a lot of in the West, and I'm sure everywhere there are even people within lineages when the lineages are maybe broken or not intact or don't have those structures. But there's a lot of folks who are just freelancing spiritual leadership
Yeah.
without they're just out there wilding without any accountability structure, without anybody who's like, dude, you're off. Like this is not right. Like we need to check in about this. And
That was, as one of my clients and a guest on the show previously said to me privately, it's Enlightenment Inc.
Yeah, exactly. Well, capitalism twists everything and it's done a number on our spiritual marketplace. So, yeah. And so, this kind of understanding of consent and accountability is so, I mean, it's just critical. It's just critical.
So, part of what I'm hearing, not to be overly reductionist or overly simplifying, is actually that you are less lonely at the top because you've put the work in to hold yourself accountable amongst your people.
I think that that's true. And I think it's also true that I'm operating within, I mean, aside from the structures of the larger culture, but like we founded this business. I created the structure. So I can create the structure. And I know that others are caught in organizations where they don't have as much control around changing the structure that they're within. And if I'm like, okay, this structure sucks, we need to change it, or there's something about this that isn't working or isn't supportive, we can then make those changes. Like I recently created kind of like a side project, if you will, with Sufi Zawiya and started doing, and I specifically found two spiritual teachers, one in my lineage and one outside my lineage, who are willing to agree to function as ombudsmen. So if there were anybody in that spiritual community, if they were like, okay, Mark's off. I don't really want to approach him. And there's a structure there that they can go directly to these other teachers who will then come to me and hold me accountable. And I created that one because as a white man leading this kind of spiritual community, I wanted people to feel safe. And so it was a way of communicating safety, but it was also a way to build safety in. And so I don't know how much sometimes when we're in larger organizations, there's very little control we have over changing a structure when a structure has something toxic mechanism, a toxic, workflow, toxic org chart built into it. And there's not the permission to make those changes.
That's that's true. And you and I absolutely know people who have created their structures and then are caught in them as if it's something external.
Yes,
So
yes.
you have a particular expertise or awareness
I
or
try.
fluidity, as you said, with being able to create a structure and then come back up out of it and evaluate that structure rather than letting it govern or trap you. We do get caught in. And a lot of the time, we also get caught in the nets that we have made for
Mhm.
ourselves. So I want to ask you about a time when you were stuck in leadership. Like, what is a decision or a leadership season that really tested you?
It's such an interesting question for me because of the nature of the work that I do and the nature of the organization. I have rarely had the self-concept of leadership or leader. Like that's not how I think of myself because I'm not in an organization, I mean, I do and I don't. And so all the decisions that I've made, like, like trying to develop a business in alignment with
Yeah.
my values, in alignment with ethics and values and spiritual alignment, the whole thing has been a test. I don't mean test in terms of being arduous. I just mean that it's like there's always a question of, like we're always moving into the unknown. Like if I
Mm.
we've got an offer right now.
Mm.
We're experimenting with a new offer
Mm-hmm.
that we just put out into the world. I'm like, is anybody going to respond to it? Like it's an experiment. We'll see. I don't know if it's going to work.
Yeah.
There's this question of there's so many terrible things going on in the world, like just incredibly toxic, terrible, dangerous leadership at the head of my country and the head
Mm.
of the United States and how that's impacting the world. And there's always a question of like, okay, so we need to acknowledge that and spend time with that with our clients, like in our community, in the business, but I also don't want it to rob us of more time than it's already robbing us of. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like, how do we balance acknowledgement without getting stuck there and then not tending to the things that really need tending and other things that need tending and care. And so I think like the thing that I'm always being pulled on and I'm having to ask really deeply inside myself is like, where does my attention need to be?
Mm-hmm.
What needs tending to in this moment? And what's the path forward with it?
Yeah.
Because, and I believe me, I'm not under any, I mean, we're a tiny company and we don't have a lot of capacity for projects because of the number of people. But even if we had 10 times or 100 times the people, there'd still be more projects than people because that's how humans tend to do things. And so, how to make choices, how to listen for what the next step is. And so I'm someone who creates content really easily. Like I create content. So like developing a
Mm-hmm.
course and we're marketing something and we're also trying to develop some internal leadership capacity within our community because we have facilitators and then we're also implementing like I'm getting coached and getting next level like DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging practices to continue to strengthen that and deepen that. And it's more than you can do in a week. And so
Mm-hmm.
listening, listening. Okay, so, and then also
Yeah.
listening like, okay, I'm tired, so I need to rest. Pushing through isn't going to do anything. And so I think that that's constantly testing me in that sense of like, am I truly listening? Am I truly listening to what's being asked in this moment? Is this being articulate? Am I being articulate?
I'm
Yeah.
with you. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Every once in a while, I have a guest who speaks so closely to my own experience, to the things that I try to employ. So I kind of have to like keep my interviewer hat on and not like, yeah, it feels good to be. It feels good to be in this place of more fully connected place of listening. And like for me, the thing that I'm working on with my teacher lately is the way that when I want something to be happening in my business that's different than what's happening, the way that my brain wants to exert and look for answers and do stuff in a scrambling way and that almost never works. It probably never works. My brain's like, it does sometimes, but no, it never really works. What does work is listening and making a practice of that. So I have a note on my second screen over there that says, Spirit is my business manager. That's who I have to check in with every day and listen and say, what is my divinely inspired action today? For the folks who are listening to this is my experience and this is Mark's experience. Everyone has a different experience of something greater in some sort of way. This isn't about trying to evangelize for any particular tradition. I sort of am I like to freelance spirit. I'm also attracted to how you were talking about lineage because am I part of a lineage? Like I come from the lineage of people who taught me, but it's not really specifically contained to one culture. But I do think any person who leads, if they're leading well, they have to be listening to more than just their brain.
Inshallah, God willing. Yeah.
Okay, so At the top, no one gets to see your balance sheet of burdens, even if you lead as openly as you do, Mark. So here we like to open the private ledger and ask a few questions about what's going on in the background for you.
Hmm.
So, can you tell me one cost you have paid for being in leadership?
Cost I paid for being in leadership. I feel like a cost I paid for not being in the times I haven't been in leadership has been to kind of just a loss of my own sovereignty, loss of a sense of my own sovereignty or stewardship over my life. I feel like cost for leadership.
Yeah, like what did it take you from you emotionally, relationally, physically? What is something you have sacrificed?
I feel like every time I've stepped into leadership, it's only given. I don't feel like it's ever taken. I don't feel like it's ever taken. Has it taken? How would I answer that? So I should be clear that when I talk about stepping into leadership, I mean at this point in my journey, there's like a spiritual surrender that's involved in the listening, and that's only ever been a benefit. I don't ever like the cost has always come from listening to my brain instead of listening to the heart, like as you were
Mm.
saying, Rachel. So it's like um
It's a valid answer.
yeah, I mean I'm really
I always like hearing a different answer, you know? I haven't heard this one. I've only ever heard it cost me in different ways. I've never heard it cost me to not. That's super interesting.
yeah. There are so many times when I think of my younger self where I was afraid to step into, and by leadership, again, I don't mean leading other people necessarily, but what some people might say, stepping into authenticity or stepping into power or stepping into like what's true or sovereignty or stewardship of one's life, or there's so many different ways to talk about it. I can only think of times that it's cost me to not, like when I haven't.
Yeah.
And every time I have, there's always been a trueness to what ensues. And I don't think I would ever call that a cost.
Mm. And as a result, you've been in leadership of humans.
Right.
So it must naturally follow that you feel like it hasn't cost you anything, because what I hear you saying is listening deeply to your heart and to your sense of something greater has only ever benefited you. It has only ever made you feel more whole and complete. And what's followed from that is the work that you do. And so you don't feel a sense of loss, you only feel gain.
That's true. I think, like, and even when I think back to, like, so in a previous life, I was
Mm.
a paramedic in the San Francisco Bay Area in Oakland, California. And there's a certain amount of leadership that comes in that kind of an emergency, first responder kind of capacity.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And I didn't have any of this. I didn't have any of these spiritual tools or anything at that time. I just had the command structure, instant command structure to lean into. And similarly, every time like when there was a need for leadership, stepping into that helped, and not stepping into it meant that
Mm.
there were no hands on the steering wheel. I had become, like, in our union, I became a shop steward and stepped into leadership there, and we ran a campaign because we had a really toxic boss and we got her fired. And that was, like, every time I've stepped into from a place of sincerity, it's only been a benefit. And I think that there have been times where I didn't know how to step into leadership and I struggled with how to do that. And there was a cost to doing it badly.
Mm.
It's like when you do it badly, there's a terrible cost.
Yeah.
But that's a learning process also. So,
I love that. And it makes sense for you. Like, for you, leadership is, in a way, an act of surrender to being in partnership with what I would like call the knowing field. We say that in family constellations, the knowing field.
mhm.
And I love that it doesn't feel like it costs you at all. It feels like it's only benefiting you. And I mean, that's the kind of people we want in leadership.
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, that's what we want is we don't want people who are doing it from a place of getting burned out and being resentful. Like they're even if they're good people, that's not good for the system.
Mhm.
People say this to me a lot of times like, "Oh my gosh, I could never be a therapist. How do you do this?" And I'm like, "This doesn't cost me.
Right.
This is what I'm meant for. I do this because I love it. And when I don't do my work for too long, I start to feel weird because this is what it feels like to contribute to the balance of my soul being on the planet." I feel out of balance when I don't do my work. So, okay. One invisible asset that you didn't realize you had at the time, like early on.
An invisible asset. I don't think I realized that I had this gift for seeing structure.
Mm.
I think it took me a long time to see it and to appreciate it. There's lots of things I don't have skills at or that I don't have gifts for, and I depend on people who have those gifts tremendously. But I see structure and I see patterns,
Mm.
and it's helped tremendously. The first, like where it first came out in terms of this work is that I was studying really esoteric spiritual work with my Sufi teachers. And I
Mm.
was also studying business. And I was seeing where the underlying structures overlaid each other. It's like, oh, here's an esoteric spiritual teaching, and here's a business teaching or principle, and I can see where they overlaid. And that's really a lot of where
Mm.
Heart of Business came from, like seeing like, oh, the spiritual presence in the physical. And, one, I didn't realize it consciously for quite a while. And I didn't realize it was like a special, like I didn't know any, not just everyone can do that. So,
No.
so that's, that's been a huge asset and been a huge piece of my, my life work.
I love that. What is one investment that you're making now for your well being or your soul?
Planting trees. I'm really into regenerative agriculture and food forest. I'm on the board of Horn Farm Center, which is a local working farm and educational center for regenerative agriculture here in York County, Pennsylvania. And we have some acres where we live. And, in the few years that we've lived on this property, we've planted 80 or 90 fruit and nut trees and shrubs
That's so cool.
and tending to them. And then just recently, as spring came on, I took all these cuttings from red osier dogwood and from willow and from hazelnut and sprouting them. And now I've got probably another 50 plants growing in a little bucket that are taking root that
So
we'll
cool.
plant out on the property, later in the fall. And so like that connection
Mm.
to the natural cycle and to growing food in a more regenerative, more supportive way takes time and money and attention and energy and takes tending to. And it feeds me spiritually and it hopefully, it is, I mean, we have gotten we have gotten fruit and nuts feeding and that we're hoping that we'll eventually be growing so much that we'll be contributing to the food shed and the regional food security. So that's
That's
it's a
amazing.
big one.
That feels wonderful. For those who may not know Mark, if you follow him on his socials, you'll see him post from the forest with him and his dogs and, spiritual business musings and things that make you go, for all my boomer and Gen X kids out there. It is really, that's really cool. I'm not as much of a plant person, although I do love seeing and having them around. And when my housemaid moved out, she was the gardener, and I was like, oh no, I miss my plants, even though I don't want to have to tend to them. Like, I do house plants. And then I was like, do I have space to get a hydroponic farm? I start to think about that kind of stuff. But bless all of the plant people. You, my mom, who's a master gardener, you are all amazing, and we all benefit so much from having you. Okay, I have two questions left. What do you wish more leaders felt permission to say out loud?
In the Islamic tradition that I practice in, the Sufi Islamic tradition that I practice in, there's stories from the caliphs who were leaders in the young Muslim community after the Prophet Muhammad salam died. There was a woman who disagreed with, like, he was up speaking, and the woman said, "This is not right. This is not right." And what you're saying isn't right. And the story is told like he was in tears of gratitude
Mm.
that people would speak up and tell him when he wasn't right. And it's like, you are right and I am wrong. And so that's what I want from any leadership, like a humility and a sincerity and a willingness to admit mistakes
Mm.
and to receive correction with the gratitude and a joyfulness and without defensiveness.
I've had people on the show say they wish leaders could say I was wrong, but I hear a nuance in what you're offering, which is you wish more leaders could say, thank you for telling me I was wrong, which is different, right?
It is different.
You get to be a little bit more powerful if you're the one who says, oh, I was wrong. I realized I was wrong. But to be able to receive it from other people in the moment, and in the moment be vulnerable and take something in and reassess, and then say, thank you for telling me. Like, that's so honoring of people, right? Like, yeah, I agree with you. Okay. Before we get to the last question, I always like to ask guests on the show if people who hear this want to in some way get in touch with you or to follow your work, how would you recommend they do that?
Yeah, so two things. One is heartofbusiness.com. We have an email list. I'm on socials, probably most active currently on Facebook, but also on Instagram and also on LinkedIn. And I wrote a book that you mentioned the name of. Thank you very much. And I should have it within easy hands reach for these kinds of things, but I don't. I've got a stack over here, which I will.
Oh, man.
Um,
I
so
don't think I have
yeah,
it by me.
so it's the yeah. so
Mine's in the restroom where I read it.
so this is a great way to, like, if you're curious about our approach to business development, this book, it's, yeah,
Heart
if you've ever written
centered
a book, you know what goes into
business.
it. So just like pour it into it.
I have
A
I
little-
have written too,
Yes.
so it is a pain in the butt.
It is. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work and care.
So that's how they should get a hold of you.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll put all of that in the show notes, of course. And the last question involves I'm super curious what you're going to say because every answer you've given today has been different than the kind of median answers I've received before from people. So if you could go back in time, we're opening the time machine. If you could go back in time, what would you say to yourself early in your career?
Would ruin everything. That's the time paradox.
Assuming it doesn't change anything for the time. Paradox is theoretical. We have never experienced this. It's only theoretical.
Yes. Ah, I mean, what I'm getting in this moment is something like "you're enough," which I think I had a lot of doubts. I definitely had a lot of doubts about that when I was younger.
I don't know if any of us can hear that often enough.
Yeah.
So probably time-wise it would be okay. It would just be a little less painful. I love it. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Mark.
Thank you for holding such a beautiful space. It's made it very easy to open and be present. So,
Yay! Absolutely. It's one of the things I really enjoy doing. Thanks for listening to Lonely at the Top. If today's conversation resonated, I hope you'll give yourself permission to pause, even for a moment, and check in with what you might be carrying silently. You don't have to hold it all alone. I work with leaders and high performers who want to clean up their secret messes like burnout, people-pleasing, perfectionism. You can learn more at rachelalexandria.com. And if you know another leader who needs to hear this show, please send it their way. Because yeah, it's lonely at the top, but it doesn't have to stay that way.